Hello everyone, my name is Dylan Prestige. I'm a student in the Sound Recording and Technology program at Montgomery County Community College in Blue Bell, Pennsylvania. This video begins a series that I'm going to be doing for my Capstone project as part of my final semester at the college, where I'm going to be dissecting a number of my favorite albums of all time using a bunch of the knowledge that I gained over the course of the past 2 years in the classes that I took within the Sound Recording and Technology program. I'm someone who loves to be engaged with music as much as I can, so this will not only help me change how we interact with music going forward, but will also provide me with a lot of insight that I can take advantage of in any sort of future career revolving around music technology or music recording. Today's album of choice, and the album that's going to kick off the entire series, is going to be the classic Beatles record, Revolver. Over the course of both my Business of Songwriting and Intro to Production courses, we spent a lot of time going over the Beatles, more specifically their adventures with musical experimentation and pop arrangements, the likes of which I think Revolver is a prime example of, thanks in no small part to the fifth Beatle, George Martin. George Martin, of course, is the executive producer behind Revolver, and aside from him, there's also the equally important Geoff Emerick, whose engineering contributions helped solidify the Beatles as a band that was deemed by many as being ahead of their time. Revolver is part of a beloved run of albums from the Beatles, spanning from 1965's Rubber Soul to the band's final studio LP in 1970, Let It Be. Among these, I consider Revolver not only to be one of the most experimental among the 8 albums that were released during this time, but also my personal favorite in large part because of that very reason. From start to finish, Revolver offers something new and refreshing on every single track, creating an album experience that feels just as diverse as it is cleverly executed. The album begins with Taxman, a George Harrison-written song that, in a unique change of pace for the Beatles, sees the band taking more of a political focus with its lyrical content. It's formatted in an almost comical manner, with the song's repeated calls of Taxman being sung kind of like it's a theme song to some old cartoon villain. The lyrics also portray the titular taxman as being particularly devilish, with lines like, "If you try to sit, I'll tax your seat. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet." Another thing that's important to mention is the unique choice in instrument panning in the track, as Harrison's lead vocals are quite literally the only thing that's panned center in the entire track. Off to the left is where the drums, bass, and rhythm guitar sit, whilst the tambourine and McCartney-performed guitar solos sit far right. It's quite the bold way to open a pop record, and only gets better from here with the smash hit Eleanor Rigby. Paul McCartney and John Lennon's mesmerizing chorus, unique vocal melodies, and the entirely string-orchestrated instrumental are all insanely well executed and standout qualities in their own right. But what sticks out to me the most about this song is George Martin's fascinating decision to take inspiration from 16th century musical modes, a precursor to our modern major and minor scales, for its melodies. The song is often referred to as an example of mode mixture, notably switching between Dorian and Aeolian modes to create a piece that captures an air of loneliness and drama. On the topic of eccentric inspirations for songwriting and arrangements, Love You Too is a special case for George Harrison specifically, as it's the first Beatles song composed as a Hindustani classical piece. Harrison had been learning the sitar in India for some time before the recording of Revolver. And while it isn't the first time the sitar had been used in a Beatles song before, it's the first time where the Asian music circle implemented instruments like the tabla and tambura to create a pop song that sounded completely different from anything the Western world had put out before. There's also tracks like I Want to Tell You on the back end of the record as well, one that features this repeated 2-note piano arpeggio that feels surprisingly dissonant and borderline unsettling over top of an otherwise relatively normal pop tune. Another production decision that adds so much character to the record at large. Of course, there's no conversation about Revolver that's complete without talking about 2 more of the band's biggest and most recognizable hits, Yellow Submarine and Good Day Sunshine. The former of which is about as catchy as a Beatles song can possibly get, taking clear inspiration from sea shanties with its use of group vocals, simplistic instrumentation, and even a horn solo to boot. I also love the call and response vocals during the third verse that sort of play out as if we're hearing back from the titular submarine's radio system. It's such a fun little detail that keeps me coming back to the track again and again. Good Day Sunshine shares a similar catchiness, though it shares more of a general happy-go-lucky sentiment in its lyrics. Its peppy piano and vocal melodies guide the song along so nicely, giving its short 2-minute runtime plenty of impact. It almost feels like a precursor to the band's even more popular smash hit Here Comes the Sun off of their 1969 record, Abbey Road. Revolver offers plenty of what the band has already been great at up until this point in their career as well, whether that be with the slower ballads like Here, There, and Everywhere and For No One, or the psychedelic rock escapades the band embarks on with She Said, and the gorgeous I'm Only Sleeping, the latter of which also features some fascinating reverse guitar parts for added detail. However, my personal favorite track off of Revolver has to be the closing track, Tomorrow Never Knows, and it's arguably the most groundbreaking track the band has done up until this point. The song maintains this steady drum groove throughout its entire runtime, giving it this loopy feel that's very reminiscent of what would eventually be the rise of krautrock from bands like Can and Neu, both hailing from Germany in the early 70s. Perhaps an even more important aspect of this song is the set of weird, psychedelic sounds that are layered in the background, the likes of which were done by creating tape loops of field recordings and outside music. In fact, Tomorrow Never Knows is often credited as the first pop song to feature this sort of experimentation. I say pop tune specifically because Paul McCartney supposedly got the idea from the avant-garde music of Karlheinz Stockhausen. These elements combined created a Beatles song that sounds like no other to me, an influential and otherworldly product of musical experimentation that feels so ahead of its time, something that could just as easily be said about Revolver as a whole. It's for all those reasons and more that Revolver remains a highlight of not only the Beatles' extensive catalog, but also the entire decade that the album was created within. As someone who can be a bit picky with classic rock as a genre, I think the Beatles to me have always stood out as a group that is just as engaging to listen to and dissect as it is deserving of its worldwide praise and respect. Albums like Abbey Road and the self-titled White Album also rank among my personal favorites in the Beatles' discography, but I feel Revolver represents such a massive shift in the band's sound and the direction of rock and pop music generally that it warranted a review like this over anything else the band had put out. At least in my mind, that is. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. There's going to be more coming very soon. In fact, the next part of this series is where I'm going to be covering an album that was equally as important to the scene and time that it came from, so stay tuned for part 2 of the Capstone series. Aside from that, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I'm super excited to continue this series, so I will see you all in the next one.